70 partout.
All right. With all that, let's get into topics of discussion. And I think you've been wanting to get talk about this for a while. So why don't we start off with your
You want to
topic?
start off with my topic?
Yeah.
All right. So, uh, something, well, because obviously everyone knows that I'm really into theology and, the Bible and, studying the history that's involved, all kind of all the nerdy stuff that nobody, is really interested in other than me, I think. But one thing that constantly, keeps coming up, and the reason I'm bringing this topic back up is because I wanted to get more of your thoughts on this, Andy, and that is the idea behind theistic evolution. First I want to know what your thoughts are about that, if you're a believer in theistic evolution, and if people that you know who are Christians, if they kind of you meet a lot of people that subscribe to that ideology.
Well, I mean, before we start, for the audience, could you explain what theistic evolution is?
Yeah. So what theistic evolution is it is kind of a way for Christians to kind of merge their belief in Christianity in that yes, God is at the center of creating the universe, but the way that He chose to the instrument that He used to create the universe, it kind of lines up with evolution. So it's it kind of trying to merge the world of Darwin and the Bible and slam them together. That's kind of that's a very maybe not the best way to put it, but I think it's definitely the most simple way to describe that.
Right. Okay. Well, now to answer your question, I think I used to, but now I'm trying to be more conscious about it, and really have a more original or almost creationist view of the world.
Okay.
Because I know what you're I definitely know what you're talking about. And I see, and I catch it within myself, because when I start using that kind of language, like, oh, well, we evolved, or, evolution, and, even though evolution contradicts what the Bible, tells us, I might not, at the time, back when I was being less conscious of it, I'm sure, I didn't necessarily mean, I think I was trying to do, that theistic evolution thing where, I was trying to fit the Bible within the structure of evolution, as opposed to maybe doing it, the opposite way.
Yeah.
But I think it's safe to say that a lot of Christians do, whether they do it intentionally or not. Because it just might be something, it just could be, something that's conditioned within them, because, going through the public school system where, they teach evolution, but they don't teach other side, which is creation, because, they instantly pull up that, they instantly call, the separation of church and state thing.
Right. Yeah.
But I mean, again, if these quote unquote educators actually knew anything about that phrase, it didn't mean that you couldn't have religion within public or say government institutions. It's just that the government couldn't, let's say, I guess, endorse a specific religion over another.
So essentially what they didn't want to have was saying like a state-sponsored church. Like
Right, they didn't
you're
want
not going to have
exactly
a church
state
make that
religion. They didn't want a
declaration.
state religion, which is funny because
Yeah.
evolution is more ideology than it is science, and so them pushing that within public schools is it could be argued that they're pushing an ideology. But for the sake of
Yeah.
simplicity, let's just let's not get into those waters. But yeah, but to get back to what I was trying to say is, I think a lot of Christians, they do have that theistic evolutionary view.
Yeah, because I know like what there are, because I initially, I think I was in that camp for a short time too,
Mm-hmm.
and the reason I ended up moving more towards kind of the creationist view is because I started asking questions, and that's and when you a lot of times you ask questions, it's like obviously there's not always going to be like answers per se, but when you start getting like people getting pissed off at you because you're asking questions, that always raises like my antennas a little bit. It's like,
Right.
something's weird here, right? And so I start, obviously that means that I end up having to do a lot of digging on my own to, let's see, let's do some actual.
Nerd alert.
Yeah, I know. I think I've talked about that several times. It's like, fine, I'll seek out the answers myself and read a bunch of books that I find exciting that nobody else does. Hell, if I had to read like study a dead language just to learn the answers I need to do, then I'll do it.
So yeah, it's like Cyrillic. How hard could that be? Cyrillic, yes. If those of you don't know, Cyrillic is the Russian alphabet, and it's basically an alien language.
Yeah, it really is. But the more that like I kind of studied that a little bit, and sure there are people who are do not do a great job of arguing the point of the creation side, what I see as a biblical view. But there's a lot of great resources for people to go check out, at least to have a differing opinion. And you start to see that, well, biblically, if certain things, like let's say, where was I going with this? No, it goes to like, because we know that death, not like physical death, but the spiritual death, that also entangles with actual, later on physical death. The death came after the Adam and Eve sinned, but there's all this time, all the stuff that was talked about beforehand. If evolution was used before that as a means of kind of creating the universe, well, that means that there was a lot of death beforehand. So biblically that doesn't make sense. I've also heard it argued that, and I'm just talking about the kind of the the Christian debate, with it. I'm not talking about like the whole like atheist Christian view discussion. That's a whole another can of worms. But the when it comes to Christianity, within Christianity, I've also heard it argued that it's like, well, for God to create a universe with all this seeming age and distance, obviously we're looking at when we look at the stars, a lot of them are many light years away, or so, or that we have all these things that are around us that appear to be that in normal circumstances would take millions of years to develop, but yet there's supposed to be this small age. So that means that God is deceptive, and that's not who God is. And the way I see it is like, well, let's look at fast forward to the Gospels, right? And the first miracle that Jesus pulls is turning water into wine. Well, how is wine created? It's a fermentation process that takes a couple of years. And not only was it wasn't just shitty wine, it was the best wine that was
Oh
served
yeah,
at
it
the
was like
end,
the
which
best
means
wine that they've ever tasted. Yeah, it's described. Yeah, in the Bible, it's described as the best wine, or like the groom described it as the best wine he's ever had.
right. And so, but that would
So it
be
wasn't just like,
before
yeah. So
that.
it's not like, yeah, Jesus turned it into grape juice. It was, it's like, like
Yeah,
like think of like the finest wine you have ever had in your life, and then times that by 10, and then you have that wine.
right. But it's like, that's that just happened, but but it has this apparent age to it. Is
Mm-hmm.
that deceptive? I don't see. That's where it's like I don't. I compare, what I see, from the creation view to this, and it's like, well, that argument to me doesn't match up. Um, and I mean, there's a lot of other stuff too. Like you even look in, if you're looking for something outside the Bible, there are quite a few arguments and because both of these, the creation and evolution model, they're, as much as it's said to be a scientific fact that evolution happened, it's technically not a scientific fact because there's no test that can
Right.
recreate the situation.
Exactly. There's nothing. You can't take can't take a frog into the lab and then do evolution on it to make it something, something else. It's
Right, and
you can't. There's no way to experiment or test for it. It's all based on. I mean, in a weird way, it's all based on faith. So
right, and then even
you believe these things to be true, even though you can't quantify it. You can't reproduce the outcome. So
exactly, and then even on, if you're looking at even on the creation side, it's like we can't create something out of nothing. It's
right.
like that. We can create stuff. We have that power, but it's with stuff that's already available to us, not taking something that wasn't there and then creating this whole new thing out of nothing. It doesn't. We can't do that. So, like I said, you're left looking at the evidence that's available to us for us to observe, and they're finding archaeologically, they're finding dinosaur bones that still have flesh on them, and if they were all, if they were millions and millions of years old, that flesh is gone. It's gonna it be decayed and dissolved. It'd be like there'd be nothing on there.
Mhm.
That's not talked about a lot. Or you have uh, you look at something like when I think it was like Mount St. Helens, or like some of the volcanoes that like went off, and they're finding that in that process that there was a lot of land shift and manipulation of the earth that should take you know thousands, to hundreds of thousands to millions of years to have that happen, but it's happening in a very short time, which means that, it kind of goes back to like what had happened back in the flood, where the world completely went topsy turvy and was manipulated in a very short time, and things
Mhm.
were fossilized very quickly because it takes a very quick cataclysmic process for fossilization to happen. Um, so I don't. It's for me, like you start doing some digging, and you start looking at things that are out there, and to me, there's a strong evidence to support the creation model as we see it in the Bible. And
Mhm.
I'm not stating that the Bible is a science book or anything like that. Even itself, it doesn't claim to be that.
Right.
Um, but I think there's good evidence, and I'm not saying that you can't be uh, a Christian if you believe in kind of like macro. What we would say is macroevolution, for like is how it's kind of the Darwinian thought, but I don't think it's completely biblical either.
Right. I mean, right. I mean, there's also the case like could God use evolution? It's like, well, why not? Well, it's like yes, why not? But but it is specifically stated within the book, and we are to believe that the Bible is true, and the Bible is the Word of God, and it's and it's good, it's good, it's useful for teaching and correcting and all that good stuff. And we have to take the creation count seriously. Um, and we have to believe, we have to agree that God created the earth and everything in it. Not with words, not through evolution.
Yeah, it's yeah, I think what I've seen is a lot of people that kind of have subscribed um, to that theology tend to, a lot of them are kind of tend to believe that don't believe in Genesis as more of a historical narrative, like a lot of biblical scholars believe that it is, because it is kind of it's in line with the other historical narrative books like Exodus and some of those type of books, and but they see it as more of like kind of a legend, and it's it's not being realistic here, and it's just telling the this legend, and it's using a lot of symbology and stuff like that, and they kind of kind of dismiss the seriousness of. It's more about the message. It's not actually about the content that's there, and it's telling a good the message is there, but it didn't actually happen that way. It's just a story, and I kind of find that to be dangerous in that sense, where it's when you actually, if you're seeing it that way, well, what's to say that like the other stuff that we quote unquote believe in as Christians, like what makes this true and this not true. It's like I think once you start like kind of mixing with like what well, this is just a story that it's just a legend, it didn't actually happen. Well, then you can start kind of saying that about other stuff that's well, that didn't actually
Well,
happen.
the foundation, but then that foundation is flawed anyways, because of course the message, what is it? Did you say context or content?
Well, it's a little bit of both, where it's like they
Well, like yeah, they said
I
like, oh well, it's not about like the content or the context, it's about the message. Like, well, that's stupid because the context and content is the message.
and that's how I see it too. It's and understanding
Yeah,
like
because you
yes,
can't
the
have because you
Bible is
can't
made up.
yeah because you can't because the story is just is the medium through which the message is transmitted, and you can't have the message without the context or the content.
Right, and that's where I think a lot of there's a lot lacking. Whereas people don't. I'm not expecting people to study it like I do,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a lot of going and doing a little bit of looking at like okay, who is this book written to? How what's the genre? Because there are many genre. There's it's the Bible is not one book. It's a anthology of many books.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of telling the story of God and the redemption of mankind. Culminating in Jesus Christ,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's and people are talking about this through various means. You have the historical narrative, you have the poetries, you have prophecy,
Mm-hmm.
you have the epistles, you have the gospels, and it's all you have to understand. Like, okay, well, is this book a historical narrative, or is it poetry? Is it a mixture of both, because sometimes that happens too. Daniel is kind of a mixture of prophecy and historical narrative,
Mm-hmm.
and you actually have to go in and kind of, not just look. You can't just look for what you want out of context, because anybody could do that. But seeing the thing as a whole, and it's like, okay, and sometimes it also takes looking at what are the people from past scholars and believers, what were they saying about it, and that's when you start to kind of get a better understanding of what's going on, because it's you're not going to understand it right away. Sometimes it does take a little bit of time and a little bit of digging to understand um, certain aspects, certain parts of the Bible, and every time I read it, I'm learning something different.
Right. Well, I think that whole notion, that kind of trap is like, oh, well, do you take the Bible literally, or not? That's a trap. That's a false binary. It's you take the Bible literally in its literary form. So when you're dealing with like an historical narrative, you take it literally as historical narrative. When you read like the poetries, then you take it literally as poetry. You know,
Right.
so so again, you're taking because remember the Bible is not one. I mean, it's found within one book, but it's many different. It's many different things. It's many different genres, and you have to take each genre literally in its literary form.
Right, and one of the really great resources on how to study the Bible better. It's a
Mm-hmm.
which is essentially the $5 word is called hermeneutics,
Right.
which is how to studying the Bible. That's essentially what that word means,
Mm-hmm.
and they talk about you're trying to cross the bridge, and because we're looking at stuff that is thousands of years old, and so some of the things that how that time compares to now, the distance is very great, so you have to find a way to cross that bridge. Sometimes it's just a hop, skip, and jump over like a little like creek, because it is fairly similar to what we have going on today, and then sometimes it takes a lot of work in building that bridge from the book that you're reading in the Bible to now, and trying to find something. What is the point?
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a lot lacking, definitely in the Christian community when it comes to that. But I don't know. Sometimes this topic comes up every once in a while, and I'm finding a lot of people who are Christian who definitely believe in it, and
Mm-hmm.
um, I don't know. I disagree, obviously, but yeah, I was just kind of curious of what your thoughts were on it, Andy.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, if I didn't, here's kind of a summary. I think that if we say that if you say that you're a Christian, that you believe you believe in Jesus, you believe in this the authority and the authority of the Bible, then you have to take that seriously. And I think also it's kind of like a reconditioning for Christians, is because I mean a lot of because a lot of time we're constantly told that we are in the world but we're not of the world. But that doesn't mean to say that the world doesn't creep in sometimes. And then so I think is we just have to get conditioned out of that conditioning that we're constantly bombarded with. Particularly that in kind of in school, or kind of culture at large, where kind of like just like turns of phrases like, oh, it's how did this evolve, when when people are talking, whether they're talking about like friendships or relationships, or lizards to birds, we kind of just use it It's become very, that kind of speech has become part of like the lexicon, um, even within Christian communities. And I think it's just we need to break out of that. That'd be the first step, I think. And
because the way I see it is like this isn't like either way that you fall on this this theology, that doesn't it's believing one way or the other isn't gonna that's not salvation. Like it ultimately comes down to what do you believe about the gospel. If you
right.
wholeheartedly believe the gospel,
I was just about to get to that point.
Yeah, that's the whole point. The rest of this is stuff that we just wrestle with and talk about because it is important. We have to understand, why we believe the things that we do, and I think it's important to always be studying, always looking at the Bible, always kind of diving deeper, and kind of figuring out our theology because it helps us to better share the gospel message.
Right. Took the words right out of my mouth.
Sorry, I didn't mean to steal your thunder, Andy.
Yeah, way to step on my moment, jerk. No, but yes, of course. That's what I was ultimately getting towards. It's like, it's like Robert said, whether you fall on either side of the issue, it's our relationship to God and to and Christ that ultimately is the most paramount thing, and and we have to constantly be checking ourselves. And if we're not everyone thinks that struggling is a bad thing, but to quote, I think a really unexpected wisdom. It came from a TV show. In this case, being the TV show Lost. There's a character, interestingly enough, named John Locke, and he was helping one of the characters on that show get over heroin addiction. And they come to this cocoon butterfly, and he says like, oh yeah, see this butterfly? There's a tiny little hole in the cocoon, and which it uses to break itself free. And I could come in, I could take my knife and cut a little slit in it, but it's not going to help the butterfly. It's gonna kill the butterfly because the butterfly, when it struggles out of its cocoon, is actually gaining muscle, it's gaining strength from its struggle to get out of the cocoon. So I could come and help it and kill it, or I could let it struggle and gain strength so it could free itself. And I think struggling isn't a bad thing. What was that?
Yeah, no, I remember that line now. It's like, yeah, that was such a great line.
Right. Yeah. So struggling isn't a bad thing, and struggling often creates strength.
Right.
So so if you think that you're struggling, or if you're a believer and you think that you're struggling, you think that that you shouldn't be struggling. It's the exact opposite. You should be struggling. You should be struggling to understand your faith, and once you do, you gain the strength through that struggle.